So the footage you're about to see is from when I did all the work on these tires a couple weeks ago. Thing is, when I did that work, I filmed an intro where I said that tires were probably the most boring part of a bike build. Now, that might be true, but I gotta say I was definitely surprised with how much I enjoyed doing some of the work on these wheels. First of all, the chrome shined up really nice, and I have some pretty cool looking tires. These are Shinko Golden Boys. Second of all, I found a simple and honestly pretty fun method of tightening the spokes. And what I'm most proud of is that I changed both these tires without popping a tube. And while I was at it, I went ahead and changed the brakes and the rear sprocket. All that's to say that this video didn't turn out nearly as boring as I expected it to. That being said, I am going to go ahead and throw bookmarks throughout this video so you can skip around to whichever part interests you the most. Alright, that's all for now. Let's get into the video. Alright, so I figured I would just go around and figure out if there were any other spokes I wanted to replace. So like I mentioned, there are a few bent ones, which I've marked here with Sharpie. So I'm replacing these three. I'm obviously going to replace the one that's broken. Then I made sure to just loosen and tighten each of the remaining spokes, and none of them snapped like this guy did. So I know I only need probably 4. I'm going to go ahead and buy 6 just to make sure. Now, one thing to note is that these are not all identical. There are inner and outer spoke, and I'm not sure which is which because I don't have them in my hands yet, but I know that one of them is 1 millimeter longer and the angle at the end of the spoke is different. So yeah, I'm getting 3 of each size spoke. I'm going to check the same thing on the front wheel to see if we need to replace any. Then we'll get that order in and hopefully have those spokes in a couple days. Alright, so while I'm waiting on the spokes for the rear wheel, I thought I'd go ahead and do these brakes. So you can see these brake pads are pretty glazed. They've got like these chips breaking off of them. So I'm definitely going to replace these. These are much drier and more brittle, so I'm also going to replace these. Just went ahead and bought some, actually I got a pair of OEM brake pads with the bike. I just bought a second set so I could replace both. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. One thing is I am going to throw on my mask because obviously brake clean, you don't really want to breathe that in. And actually these old brake pads are made of asbestos. So I'm going to wear gloves too just to be safe. Should be pretty straightforward. Just basically going to unhook everything, re-grease anything that pivots or moves, and make sure to keep grease off the pads. The new pads came with new springs too, so I'll probably replace those. Should be pretty straightforward though. Alright, so I got this whole inner brake area pretty clean. I just using like Q-tips and paper towel. Got the outside pretty clean too. So what I'm gonna do now is re-grease this inside area. This is obviously the Speedo drive. I just use this on the 450 and it's just like a general grease for kind of everything. So I'm going to fill that in here, throw that gear back in, and then I'm going to grease this channel here. This is what the brakes pivot on. Then we'll drop it back in there and we'll throw a fresh set of brake pads in. One thing that I did notice is that I got these off 4-into-1. They were just called like genuine Honda CT90 brake pads. These are great. This is exactly what I took off the bike. These are the brake pads I got with the bike. They were in a Honda bag, so they are genuine Honda parts. But I believe these are for maybe the CT90 or the Z50. They're just a little different. They have a different spring style. However, if I hold them up to the other pads, they're nearly identical. So I'm going to try to use them. If they work, that's great. And if not, I can buy another set of brake pads. I can maybe even push these rear brake pads a little further, although there is definitely some glazing on the pads. Alright, so I thought since I'm doing the rear wheel, might as well do the rear sprocket in this video. So these 4 bolts on the sprocket actually have, it looks like a little washer or something with tabs that fold up to lock them in. So I'm just going to use the screwdriver and a hammer, and I'm going to tap all these lock tabs down. Alright, so I'm going to go through and clean this all out best I can, and then we'll throw this all back together. I will say, ideally, I would have a new one of these to use for all these bolts, but I'm just going to reuse these and hope that the tabs don't break. Alright, so this being one of, if not the most dirty part of the bike, I didn't worry too much about cleaning, just got the loose dirt out, then I threw some steel wool on the outside here because that's the part we'll be looking at, shined it up a little bit, but basically this part's just always going to look dirty. So I got this Parts Unlimited sprocket off eBay, and I just like to keep the tooth count on the outside for if I want to buy a new sprocket in the future. I know the tooth count 45 is the CT90 stock tooth count. I did break one of these tabs. 7 of 8 is pretty good, so I'm going to roll with it. The last things that go on are this metal cover and this bushing, and then this axle sleeve thing gets a little bit of grease on the outside, and this should slide through and get bolted on along with the chain tensioner. Like that. Chain tensioner and this nut. Alright, so I just got one spoke in there because it was outermost, and basically it looks like the process for getting these newer unbent spokes in there is just going to be trying to get it to where it should go. So it looks like this spoke wants to get to this hole, and when you try to bring it up, it gets caught on this spoke. So I think it's just a process of removing this spoke out of the way, getting that one in, then putting this one back in, and just kind of going from there. I only have 3 more spokes to do, so this shouldn't be too bad. Alright, so I'm going to show you the technique I am using to tighten my spokes. So basically I mark every 3 spokes. In other words, there's a gap of 2 spokes, and then I mark the next one. So you can see a Sharpie mark on each of these. And you can count by hand, but I found that I lost count a few times, so it's just easier to mark all of them. I'm going to shine up these rims with steel wool at the end anyway, so the Sharpie's coming off. So then you mark one of those marked spokes with a dot. And actually, probably shouldn't have been this one. Let me see. Because you want to get one that has a good sound. That has a good sound, and you want to tighten that to a point where that sound is like clear and distinct. Let's see. So this is just going to be like tuning a guitar or something. Basically, tighter is, the higher the pitch, looser it is, the lower the pitch. And then it'll get so loose at a certain point where it's not giving you anything. You definitely don't want that. Sometimes you have to hold the adjacent spokes. If the whole wheel is still kind of loose, you have to hold the adjacent spoke away from it. So you only get the sound from one spoke. So when you have like a torque spoke wrench, what it's doing is it's obviously checking how much torque you've put on the spoke nut, and then it clicks like a torque wrench. The reason that I think this is better is, one, you can just use a regular spoke wrench, but also you're not checking the torque of the nut, you're checking the actual tension of the spoke, obviously by ear, so maybe it's less precise than a torque wrench, but I think you're measuring a more important parameter than the tension on the nut. You're measuring the tension on the spoke, and you want that tension to be as even as possible across the wheel. So the tension corresponds to a pitch or a note, and you know, I'm not super technically musical person, but you can, I think, pretty easily. You can hear 2 different ones, and you can see that obviously that one's lower. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that one. Let's see now. So you can see that's pretty good, right? So there's definitely a margin for error here in that you're not going to get them always absolutely perfect. But yeah, basically what you want to do is you want to mark that reference note here with some kind of extra mark. And what you're going to do is go, okay, that's my note, and then you go 1, 2 to the next one. That one's much lower. So then you tighten it up. Now those are pretty close, so now I'm gonna go to the next one. 1, 2, this one. I'm gonna hear it. And this is like in woodworking, when you have a reference cut, you want to keep checking against that first reference. You don't want to go to the last one you tightened. You want to actually go back to that first reference, and you want to make sure, still a little low, tighten a little. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So now I go to the next one, 1, 2, this one. And I'm just going to work my way all the way around. I'll get back to my reference, and then I'll offset that by 1, and I'll go all the way around, and then I'll go back 1, and I'll go all the way around. And basically, if you do that, you're going to hit every spoke. Then you can go around and sort of go like that, and if you have more or less the same kind of note all the way around, then you're pretty good to go. This bike has never hit over probably 50 miles per hour, so absolute perfect is not necessary, but definitely want good spoke tension and everything, and I think this is a pretty easy way to do it by ear, and honestly I think it's pretty fun. Alright, so I just went around, and this is kind of the satisfying part. You can see that they're all more or less now the same note. So yeah, I mean there's definitely some variation in there, but they're all nice and tight, and I think I'm now good to go ahead with the rim cleaning. I'm gonna throw some steel wool around the whole thing, and then we'll do rim tape, tube, tire, and this wheel should be pretty much good to go. Alright, so I'm really happy with how that quadruple O steel wool did on the chrome here. Looks pretty good. I got a lot of the rust spots off. So the last thing I'm going to do before doing the tire is this inside surface that the brakes rub against gets kind of glazed over time by the brake pads. So I'm just going to hit it with some 150 grit sandpaper to rough it up again, and then we'll clean it up, and then we'll get the tire on. Alright, let's change this tire. So first thing is obviously I'm going to put on the rim tape. Next, I'm going to throw some air into this tube. And on these, the front and rear are identical. It's 2.75 by 17. Alright, so there really is no direction on these tires that I can find. And I don't actually even think there's a balancing mark. Throw the valve stem in near this DOT symbol. I don't think that really matters, but I'm going to do it that way anyway. And you just sit on the tire a little bit. You can get it to open up, and you can squeeze the tube in there. This is a method of changing tires that I found on Brickhouse Builds, and I think he might have gotten it from someone else, but I forget who. It's super easy. I did it for the front tire already. Basically, you need, like, for this tire, 7 zip ties. And basically, I'm going to throw a zip tie every maybe 9 inches or so around the tire and tighten it down with the tube inside so the two beads of the tire touch or get real close to each other. Alright, so I threw all those zip ties on, got the bead pretty much closed all the way around, and so really this is pretty simple. I'm just going to throw some of this Windex on both beads here. So I'm just going to get the valve stem lined up at the bottom. The idea is to kind of squish the bead on a little bit just by hand. You want to get that valve stem started so you can get the nut on there. Now I have one nut snugged up to the washer on the actual tube, and that's going to be on the tire side of the rim. Then I'm going to have the other nut on the other side of the rim. And for now, this is just to keep the valve stem in place. And then I'm just going to by hand pretty much just going to push this whole thing down. Trying to keep the rim square to the valve stem. Then for this last little bit, you use the tire spoon. Yeah, and it's basically just that easy. I'll tighten down the valve stem. Try to sort of get it pulled up a little bit using that nut. And then I'm gonna go ahead and clip all these. All right, I actually got this Craftsman air inflator. It's really great. It's like a portable charger, it's a flashlight, it's an air inflator. But so I'm gonna set, this is the rear tire, so it goes to 28 PSI. I'm gonna set the inflator to 28, and then we'll just watch this inflate and make sure it's all seating correctly. All right, don't hear any hissing or anything. The pressure reading is staying stable. So it looks like we don't have any leaks, which is great. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop this off. Just gonna tighten the nut down like finger tight to the rim. Not gonna actually pinch it at all. Now throw the valve cap back on there. And now we're all set with the rear tire. So the only thing I didn't film on the tire change process was balancing these tires. You can see here that both tires required kind of a lot of weight to be added. I think just these are cheap off-road tires, so it makes sense that they wouldn't be very balanced. It's not a huge deal though. I got them balanced, and anyway, they're not going to be going very fast. To do the balancing, I just use the same DIY tire balancing stand I use for the 450. So if before this video you thought that tires were the most boring part of the bike build, you're probably still right, but I really was surprised at how much I enjoyed working on these, especially the spoke tightening. Anyways, next week we're doing suspension. Until then, thanks for watching.